Don't we all have wishes and dreams? And sometimes they seem too far away to be ever reached. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the story about a man named Reid Stowe. He built his own boat and he sailed the oceans for 3 years without stepping on land ever. I met Reid over a decade ago and I'm in contact with him ever since. In this following Skype conversation, he shares his story of adventure with me and all the obstacles that he had. May this story inspire you like it has for me. Have fun. Are you ready to start?
Okay.
What did you do and in what kind of a time frame? And yeah, what was your vision? So maybe first just tell me what you did. So let's start with that.
Okay. Yeah, first I'll tell you what I did. What I did was I planned to do the longest sea voyage in history on my 70-foot schooner that I designed and built about 20 years earlier for that purpose. So I went to sea and I sailed for 1,152 days from April 2007 until July 2010. June 2010, and I set off with my partner Sonia, who didn't make it all the way because she got pregnant. And well, anyway, we got back together, and now we have our son, who just turned 8. So I went to sea on my sailboat for 1,152 days, always sailing on the open ocean without receiving supplies or help, and sailed back into New York City on the date that said I was coming back. So that says it rather simply, but the question is, how was I able to sail a boat on the ocean nonstop without resupply so much longer than any other sailor or person has ever done? And now that's a big story that can be told on a lot of different levels. But that's the basic story, that I went to sea for over 3 years, kept sailing, didn't receive help or supplies, took everything with me, and then sailed back into New York City when I said I would. Okay, so the other questions that you asked me in the beginning were a whole lot of questions, and that might be, how did I conceive of it? It was because I love the ocean all my life, and because I had the drive to keep sailing, and I had the success, and I loved it so much. Even in the beginning, I didn't want to stop. Whereas other people wanted to stop, I wanted to keep going. Because being at sea on a boat, I wanted to make it seaworthy, and I wanted to take everything with me. And I was happy there, so I didn't need to come to shore. So the truth is, even in the beginning of my sailing as a teenager, I realized I didn't really care where I was going. It was about getting the boat seaworthy and being able to sail at sea. And then I loved the sea so much, the endless horizons. I didn't really care where I was going. I grew up traveling. My father was in the Air Force. We actually lived in Germany for 3 years when I was 4, 5, and 6. And I remember it very well. And it was a very good time, but it was all part of our traveling experiences growing up. And when I was a child, my dad and granddad and my mother and her brothers and sisters built a house on the Intercoastal Waterway in North Carolina down on the ocean. So I grew up by the sea. Every summer and every vacation, we were all there as a family. But our family traveled more. We lived in the Philippines for 2 years, and we traveled a lot during that time. So I grew up traveling, and I grew up loving the sea. So by the time I started sailing as a teenager, yes, it was nice to visit these foreign countries and to come in as a sailor. And I always felt exclusive because travelers, tourists, and backpackers weren't the same as sailors. And they stayed in hotels, and we were in the harbors. So we were by the life of the people that we met. But again, it wasn't really the people or the cultures that I was interested in. It was how to get the boat seaworthy and go out again. So from that, I decided that I had circumstances I was lucky enough to design and driven and skilled enough to build what I called the ultimate long-distance heavy weather sailboat. And it had to be able to go anywhere in the world and stay there. So we made an expedition to Antarctica. And before going to Antarctica, I said, what can I do next? But not as a challenge, but as me evolving. How was I going to evolve to do something more challenging than sailing to Antarctica? Now, that was 1986, so there was very little talk of Antarctica then, and very few small boats had ever gone there. But I thought that after sailing to Antarctica, I could do the longest sailing voyage in history without stopping, without receiving supplies. And at that time, it was 310 days. Bernard Moitessier, a Frenchman, sailed around the world and a half. And I was influenced by him because he said you could go to sea and not be interested in the shore, but be interested in the sea and just keep going and keep going. And he had some ideas for how you could do that. If you had a boat big enough to carry the food, if you could catch the rain. So that idea was in my mind. And when I said I could do the longest sea voyage in history, the Antarctic expedition became a test voyage for the longest sea voyage in history. And I started testing all the systems I would need to be able to go and keep going. I conceived of going 1,000 days nonstop at sea. So when I finished the Antarctic voyage, I proceeded to promote my longest sea voyage in history. And I went to Antarctica with 8 people, 5 nationalities, 2 women. And I thought I was going to need 6 people to do the longest sea voyage in history because this 70-foot gaff rig schooner is a big sailboat and actually requires a lot of people. And big boats like this had never been sailed by a small group of people. They were always like cargo boats, fishing boats, and they took a lot of people to sail them because they were old-fashioned with heavy sails and block and tackle. So it took me 20 years before I was able to set off. It was 20 years of work and trying to get ready to set off for the 1,000-day voyage. Of course, during that time, I did a lot of sailing, and I did a lot of learning, and I went further and further. And it was in New York during that time that I met you, and I kept trying. I kept doing longer and longer sails, and perhaps one of the biggest problems that I had was that I was attempting to do something that no one had ever conceived of. So every time I said to someone, this is what I'm getting ready to do, they never had ever heard of something like that. And it was so far beyond what anyone had ever done that, of course, people thought it was impossible. So other sailors thought it was impossible, and Men of the Sea and the Explorers Club, and everyone I went to for help thought it was impossible. No one could understand me. So it was a long process of explaining myself how I thought that I could do it. That's one thing is that I never had doubts. I was always going to do it from the moment I conceived of it. And for the 3 years that I spent at sea, I never had doubts. I never changed my mind. I always knew that I could do it. So during those 10 years that I spent in New York, I went on longer and longer sea voyages. And I got a lot of press, and I kept trying to get a sponsor. I kept trying to get help, and it just never came. So that's why it took so long was for those 20 years, I never had a job. I never had an income. I only was helped by the man whose pier I was on in New York City. He helped me, and then I wrote for food, and I started putting food in my cargo hold 15 years before I left. I wrote a food company, and I said, I need your food, and they donated to me. I wrote lots of sale equipment companies and tried to get equipment, and I also tried to get a sponsor to put their name on the sale. So I tried all kinds of things all the time, and it was a little bit slow in coming, and there were expenses with the boat, and so that's why it took a long time. Now, also, during that time, at first, after sailing to Antarctica with 8 people, and it was very difficult, I thought I needed at least 6. But I never found the people that could commit to going 1,000 days. Even only 1 or 2 said, well, I'll go a year with you. And I said, well, that's not enough. You have to commit to the whole voyage. So luckily, I met Sonia in New York City when she came down to the boat, and she said she was ready to go 1,000 days with me. I had known her for 3 years casually, but once she committed, we put our minds and hearts together, and I committed to her, and she committed to me. And then I had a partner, and that was a very important thing for me. I didn't want to set off by myself. And it took me many years to realize that I wasn't going to have a big crew, and I had to learn how to sail the boat with less people. Pretty soon I realized, wow, I might be going by myself. I better learn how to sail this boat by myself. So I did things to the boat that had never been done to a schooner before, because they were never sailed alone. But how I rigged the ropes and the sails and the pulleys, and how I made test sails at sea for long periods of time. And I realized that I could sail the boat with just one woman. I had never sailed the boat by myself. So once Sonia was committed, it still took us another year before we were able to set off. But we did, and we set off, and we went out to sea, and we started sailing around the world. We had all kinds of adventures, and we shared what we were doing live. During the whole voyage, we sent back photos and pictures, and we told our story. And we never, ever had what we needed. We always had almost enough, except we were donated more than enough food. But by the time I left, I had old sails, old pulleys, old ropes, not enough of this, not enough of that, and we knew it was just time to go, and we left. So there was a lot of work keeping the boat sailing with the sails tearing and so forth. But we had a wonderful adventure, and Sonia and I got along great together. Sonia spent almost a year on the boat, and then we were between Cape Hope, South Africa, and Antarctica, and she told me she thought she was pregnant. And I said, well, I don't think so, because, women, they miss their periods when they're in traumatic situations. And this was scary, being in the roughest waters in the oceans of the world, down near Antarctica, and our sails were tearing out and things were breaking, and it was also beautiful. We had beautiful moments in all kinds of ways, in nature, with each other, with our spiritual visions and so forth, but it was also hard. And then she began to convince me that she was pregnant. So I had to, before we left, even when we first got together, Sonia asked me, well, if I go with you, what will happen if I have to get off the boat for any reason? And we didn't know what reason it would be. We might have imagined that she couldn't take it any longer. You can't imagine how many people in the lifetime of the boat, because it's a big boat. I've had a lot of crew. People change when they get on a boat at sea. On the land, they can be very positive, very strong, wonderful people. And within a sometimes very short period of time, when people get on the sea, they change. And they often break down. So we had to realize that might be possible. Sonia might have to get off the boat. Maybe she would get hurt. Maybe she would get sick. So I said that I will drop you off on another boat. You will be rescued at sea. And I'm going to keep going no matter what, do or die. So when she got pregnant, I never considered ending the voyage, and she never considered it either. So we had to figure out a way to get her off the boat so that I could keep going. So I had been in touch with a man that I found out that I never heard of him, but then I found out he had done 2 record-breaking sea voyages, first for 420 days, and then for 658 days. John Sanders from Australia. Before him was Bernard Moitessier at 310, and then Robin Knox Johnson from England started the whole thing of people taking long voyages at sea, and he was something like 290 days or something like that. So other than that, there was one American who had sailed 155 days. So that puts it in perspective how few people have ever been at sea over 150 days, maybe only 3 men. So people have not gone at sea for very long. The military can keep people at sea for a few months, but they've got a big group of men together and their morale goes down real quick. So they're not out there for that long, actually. The whaling people were at sea for years. Yes, they were. They left particularly New England, but they stopped often right away in the Azores after being at sea only for a few weeks to resupply and get things. So whaling people were gone out for whales for years at a time before they returned, but they stopped all these different places around the world and resupplied. So for a person to do a long record-breaking voyage, they had to go to sea and do it without resupply. And that was when the first records started in the late 60s, when Sir Francis Chichester was knighted for sailing around the world with 2 stops. And he did 1 stop in Australia, and it was about 89 days, and then from Australia to England, about the same amount of time. So he was knighted for doing the longest single-handed sailing voyage in history, and that set the tone for men to see how far they could go at sea. Then they did a race around the world that Sir Robin Knox Johnson was in and completed in England. Bernard Moitessier decided he didn't want to go to England. He sailed around the world and then went halfway around the world to Tahiti again. So those are the only men that have been at sea for longer than 150 days. So Sonia went 307 days. But we contacted John Sanders in Australia and emailed him, because I had been in touch with him, and I said, here we come. My girlfriend's pregnant. She has to get off. You have to come out to sea and rescue her, because I'm going to go on and beat your records. So he got together with his fellow sailors at the Royal Perth Yacht Club, and they came out and rescued Sonia. Sonia then landed in Perth, Australia, and then she flew back home to Queens, New York City, where she's from, and she lived with her family and announced that she was pregnant. And and now she had to wait for me to come back. And she waited over 2 years for me while I completed the voyage. So once Sonia left the boat, there I was on the boat by myself, sailing with complete determination to finish the voyage. Sonia and I were both in sort of a timeless state of mind. So because we had entered into a timeless state of mind, I think she was, in a sense, suited to make that wait for me, because 2 years might have seemed a long time to one person, whereas because she had gained some control over a sense of what time was, she could calmly make that wait for me. Now, I remember there was a reporter that asked her after the voyage, "You had never been to sea before," he said. "How did you prepare to go to sea for 1,000 days?" And she said, "I didn't prepare to go to sea for 1,000 days. I prepared for an eternity." So that showed the goddess wisdom that she had. And that was a wonderful thing for me to imagine. She had the ability to say, well, I'm going to set off with this man who I've not known very well for very long. I'm going to trust that he can take care of me and be good, and I'm going to go to eternity with him, and I'm going to risk my life with him. And when she did that, of course, I did my best to appreciate her and support her goddess powers and say, yes, she can do it, and stay focused on always being true to her in every way that I could. And so that gave us a very powerful relationship. So when I was left at sea by myself, we never had any doubts. Of course, people found it hard to believe that during the time we spent at sea, just the two of us, almost a year, that we always got along. Everything was fine. It was really good. And once she got off, we had a clear understanding, and now it was up to me to finish the voyage that was my lifetime work and my that I had worked on for 20 years. And she knew that there was hundreds of people that had helped me in many companies, and that for us to set off, the object was for us to finish our mission, and that was what I intended to do. So I kept going. I had a lot of tough times. It was like, how do I have enough food? Is the food going to last? Is the food not going to be spoiled? Am I going to stay healthy? Am I going to be able to catch enough rain? It's really difficult out there when it's stormy. The wind blows too hard. You can't catch it, and the waves are breaking, and it's too full of salt. So, of course, I had a lot of problems and difficulties. And when I dropped her off in Australia, I got a public backlash. People began to really hate me. I mean, hate me. I got death threats. People said, how dare you drop off this girl halfway around the world and you keep going on your adventure? That's no example for a hero. And like one of the editors from a big news organization that had been doing our story told the writer, I don't like him anymore. We're not doing any more stories about him. So we got a big public backlash. I started getting hate mail, and it was rough and stormy for me in the Southern Ocean, and the storms blew out all my old sails, and there was a whole period of time, and I remember when I got back from the voyage and I looked at my log, and there was a big handwritten thing that said, all of my sails are torn now. So when those big storms come and the sails are old and worn out, they just blow out and break. And pretty soon all of my sails were torn. But I had backup sails, but they were torn too. So I had this huge pile of sails, and I was always sewing to repair my sails. And if I could get one up and give the boat a little control to keep going, then I would do that. And then my water tanks were running low, and then I was getting all this hate mail, and the media didn't want to do stories on me. So I sailed on, and it was in a way a little bit grim, even though I did yoga every day, even though I meditated, even though I praised the spirit of nature and gave great thanks for the power that I had. And even though I had incredible visions, and those visions empowered me and made me into a Superman, and I knew it. But it was still a little bit grim, and I just didn't have a real vision of how everything was going to go. And I knew I had to find and get water somehow. So I knew that I could catch rain on the equator, or I figured that I could. And I knew that the end of the equator closer to South America, near the Galapagos Islands, would be a better chance to catch rain. So I managed to get up there, and I did catch rain. And when I got up there, I said, wow, my hands are so sore from doing all this work all by myself and doing all this sewing. I'm just going to let the boat drift for a while, and I'm going to live at sea. Then I'm going to catch my fish and eat my fish, and I'm going to grow my sprouts and eat my fresh salads and do my yoga, and I'm not going to care that I have to sail hard like a sailor on a course to somewhere. So I let the winds and the currents drift me around, and I caught my water, and the winds and currents drifted me all around, and then I decided to head south from the equator. I headed south. When I got south, I said, whoa, well, I don't want to sail around Cape Horn now because it's wintertime down there. So I made a long loop, and I started to sail back up towards the equator, towards warmer waters. And at that time, I got an email from an old sailing friend of mine who said, oh, because our course was always verified by a satellite tracking unit that was donated to us by a company that monitored the Canadian fishing fleet. So that gave the truth of my voyage. Because from the very beginning, there were all these people that said, he's doing something that's a fake. He's creating a fake because no one can do what he's doing. It's false what he's doing. And they kept writing the media. Anytime a writer did a story of me, they attacked the media and said, this guy's false. He's fake. He's been a phony all along. Luckily, I had the satellite tracking unit, which always put my course on a Google map on our website that my volunteer team from New York was managing. We couldn't do blogs or communicate with the public because these trolls were sending so much hate mail, they made it impossible for us to post things, do a live broadcast, and have people write in and communicate with them and so forth. So my course was plotted on a map all the time. Now, to go back a little bit, during my test voyages, and one time I got the idea that I wanted to draw an image into the ocean with the course that I sailed, meaning that I would change course and draw something in the ocean. And I was feeling that the world was obsessed with speed. And I noticed that the only boats that were getting sponsored were racing boats. So I wanted them to remember the ancient wisdom of the tortoise and the hare, Aesop's fable, to go slowly but surely. So I took the maps, and I know the winds and currents of the world very well after sailing around the world all my life. I said, I'm going to sail down to the South Atlantic Ocean. I'm going to get in these winds and currents, and I'm going to draw a sea turtle as big as the South Atlantic Ocean as a reminder to the world when they see this sea turtle to remember the ancient wisdom to go slowly but surely instead of fast and brash. So I drew the sea turtle on the map, and Associated Press and a lot of media took the picture, put it up, sent the story worldwide and said he's going out to draw a sea turtle to give a message to the world. So I did. I set off, and I succeeded at that. And that was all part of what boosted me to feel that, yes, I had the power to do the longest sea voyage in history. I had created a wonderful healing and spiritual antidote for our speed-obsessed society. So when Sonia and I prepared to go to sea, we said, we're going to draw a heart in the South Atlantic Ocean to remind the world that love gives us the power to do what we do. That was our goal. When Sonia and I set off from New York City, we were only 500 miles offshore, and we were run over by a giant ship in the night. I was on watch, but really, you can't look out all the time. And you can't look forward, you can't look around all the time. It's impossible. You need to rest, you need to read, you need to move around, you feed yourself. The boat keeps going on course. And the ship, we later found out, saw us, but didn't change course, didn't think they wanted to. And when the ship hit us, they smashed us. And I immediately called them on the radio, and I said, wait, I didn't know if we were sinking. I wanted them to rescue us. So they waited, and the boat hit in the front. We lost our bowsprit, the pole that goes in the front, and we lost 2 out of 4 of our sails. The cables broke, and luckily our mast stood up because they were big, thick pine trees that went through the deck, and the rigging held them up. A modern boat, they would have lost their rigging. They would have been dismasted. But we glanced off and went down the side of the ship. We called the ship and said, wait, and then I found out that we weren't sinking. So I told the ship to go on. We're not giving up our boat. Then we thought we'd go back to New York. I thought we were. I thought the voyage was all over. And I was moaning and complaining and going, I worked on this for 20 years, and now we're only 500 miles from New York, and we're disabled at the beginning of our voyage. We have no money. We've borrowed money. We have nowhere to go back to. We'll never get going. What are we going to do? And then Sonia said, but Reid, I thought you told me that you could fix anything. So in her subtle way, she proved that she had the courage to keep going and that she believed in me. So I had to rethink it. I had to say, well, let me see. Maybe I can fix all of this, and maybe we can keep going. So we drifted in the North Atlantic for a month, disabled, going this way and that way with the wind and current, the storms as they blew us, while we worked to fix the boat to keep going. And we did fix the boat to keep going, but the problem was we no longer had the bowsprit over the front of the boat, which allowed the boat to balance in the wind with the 4 sails set in a row. Without the sail in the front, she didn't balance. The boat wanted to always turn into the wind. So even though we were on a straight course, the rudder was cocked to the side and causing drag. So we decided to sail on like that. So in truth, we did the whole voyage. We sailed over 3 years with a disabled boat, which made it slower, which also made it so that we couldn't sail up against the wind very well. Now, the amazing and nice thing about a sailboat, with the shape of the sailboat and the keel and the shape of the sails, if the wind is blowing from the north, you can sail northeast against the wind hard and strong on a good course. But because our boat was broken, we could no longer do that. We could barely sail sideways to the wind, so we had to be very careful not to get anywhere near the shore, because if there was a lot of wind shifting and blowing, we didn't have the ability to fight our way off the shore. So that governed the way we sailed the boat for the next years. So, of course, when that happened, we lost our ability to maneuver the boat, so we could no longer draw the heart in the ocean that we wanted to draw. And that was the one thing that was more disappointing to me than being disabled, was not being able to draw my heart. Well, I forgot about that, and I gave up on it. But everyone knew that I had drawn the sea turtle and that we wanted to draw the heart. So when my friend looked at the Google map on our website, what he looked at in the course was a whale. That somehow we had drawn a whale 4,000 miles big. Now, when I described how I got up to the equator and I let the boat drift in the winds and currents, up near the equator, the wind and current shifts. So the current's running one way, and then you're getting a countercurrent, and it's taking you another way, and the countercurrent's stronger than the wind, so you're drifting like this. So when we went up to the equator, we went one way, and then the wind changed, and it blew us back, and that's what drew the tail of the whale. And it really looks like the tail of the whale. And then when I sailed down to Cape Horn, I said, wait a minute, it's wintertime. I don't want to go around Cape Horn in the wintertime now, so I made a long loop and turned back up. And when I started sailing back up, I actually had defined the shape of a whale, and it really looked a lot like a whale, that I was shocked. I said, I've drawn a whale. And then I said, now wait a minute, if I change course right now, I can make the flipper perfect, and I can slim the body down and make it look exactly like a whale. So I did that. And when I did that, I marveled, and I felt that the ocean was speaking to me, saying, look, we've given you this gift. You've drawn a whale 5,000 miles big. And that was the moment that everything changed for me in the voyage, where I was feeling rather grim and disappointed because Sonia had to get off, and all of the people were attacking me and telling me how bad I was, and trying to destroy the voyage in the public's view, where the media had dropped me. Really, I had drawn a whale, and I said, this is a magical, wonderful thing. Of course I'm going to make it with the voyage. So my whole attitude changed. And I felt great. And from there, I headed down to Cape Horn, and I knew I could make it. So the last half of the trip, I was feeling like that moment changed things. And then I was able to deal with all the negative stuff much more. And of course, I had to keep working to do what I was doing, to sail around Cape Horn by myself in a disabled, big old-fashioned schooner. And I did it, and I felt overwhelming amounts of love for the ocean, for everything. It meant that when I had to sew my sails, I picked up my needle and I looked at that needle very closely, and I said, I love you. You're wonderful. Look at what you do for me. And then I start to sew the sail, and I go, I love sewing sails. It's an ancient art. It helped man go over the seas. And I was inside of the boat, and the sunlight came through on the sail, and I was sewing, and I said, look, I'm in a wonderful, magical temple, and I love it so much. And then I'd be tired. I'd fall asleep. And when I woke up, I'd look at the ocean, and I'd burst out, and I'd go, oh, I love you so much. And then I would think of my wonderful mom and dad who had helped me all my life. And then I would go, oh, I love you, Mom and Dad. And then I would start crying. And then I'd look at the ocean and I'd say, I love you. And the ocean, the breeze blew my tears that kept coming and they tickled my face. And then the tears blew off of my face into the wind and I just go, oh, I love you. And then I start laughing and then I go, I love you. Now, someone might think that I was going crazy, but I knew that I was tapping powers greater than myself. And I knew when I had these outbursts of love for everything that I was being empowered. So I lived over 3 years at sea, and I got stronger and stronger. And I ate my sprouts and my rice and beans, and I caught my fish, and I ate fish every day, and I ate my fresh giant salads every day. And I kept saying, I love you, I love you, I love you. And of course, I was tired. I was being rocked by waves longer than any human had ever been rocked by waves. I sailed around Cape Horn. I was turned upside down, and we survived, and we went on. We kept going. Things were broken, sails were torn, and I worked every day. And I said, I love you, I love you, I love you. And I sailed on up into the south, up into the Atlantic, and then I looked at two of my outgoing lines on the chart. So every day I put a mark on the chart and drew a line to the next stop. That's how I knew that I had drawn a whale. So I looked at the two lines and I said, those two lines form the bottom of a heart. If I get up to there, I can go downwind across the top of the heart, so I won't need my most skillful sailing maneuvers. I'll go downwind and I'll make 2 loops to make the top of the heart. I just have to make the bottom of the heart in the middle of the heart and make the 2 loops about the same size. So I was able to sail a heart into the South Atlantic Ocean, and it was beautiful and it's perfect. And so after that, I still had almost a year to go. But I didn't care about anything anymore. And, of course, I was worn out, and my sails were worn out, and I'm going, why do I have to sail so fast? I don't have to sail so fast. I'm out here, and I love it. And I looked up to the equator, and I said, I need a place to get out of the waves, because I'm in the waves. I'm rocking so hard all the time. It's tiring. And then I counted the waves. So I closed my eyes and I counted 1 wave rock me, 2, 3, 4. And sometimes it's a big wave, and sometimes it's 2 little waves on a big wave. But every time a wave rocked the boat, I counted, and I did it several times. Well, I counted waves for 1 minute, and then I multiplied. But I did it several times on several different days. And I came to the conclusion, and I announced it in my writing, that I'm riding 31,000 waves a day. That means 31,000 times a day I'm being rocked. Now I'm being pushed over against the side of the boat, or I'm holding on, or I'm holding with my knee, or I'm gripping the corner with my shoulder blade because my arms are too tired to hold on any longer. And I said, geez, I need to go somewhere in the ocean where there's not so many waves. So that's very difficult to do, especially with a boat that's disabled, and you have the winds and the currents that are taking you in different places, and those winds and currents are totally overwhelming for a sailboat, especially a disabled sailboat. But the secret to man exploring the world was learning those winds and currents, and Columbus might be the first example of that, with realizing that he could take a current down low across the South Atlantic to get to the New World, and that he could come back by following this loop of a current, which becomes the Gulf Stream, and that current takes you back across the North Atlantic to take you back to Europe. So as man began to discover the winds and currents of the world, they were highly guarded secrets, because that was what allowed them to venture to different places. So I studied the winds and the currents of the world throughout my lifetime, and I knew them very well. I knew them by heart. I also knew where the hurricane seasons were. So there's a very big hurricane season in the western Atlantic that covers all of the Caribbean and the East Coast. And so I made a big circle on my chart saying, well, I'm not coming in this area between June, July, and October, November, because all those months I could have a bad hurricane and that could wipe me out. So I looked at all the hurricane seasons around the world, and I made big circles, and I said, now I have to watch out for these hurricanes. Also, I didn't want to sail in the Southern Ocean in the wintertime. I don't want to sail around Cape Horn in the wintertime and have these giant frozen storms. It's already cold enough down there in the summertime, because it's so far south and so close to Antarctica. So I had to follow the winds and the currents. So I said, well, now I need to find a place where it's wonderful to sail in the trade winds. The wind always blows from one direction. It's a warm wind, and you have beautiful weather undisturbed for weeks at a time. And it's wonderful sailing, and that's how people sail around the world, by staying in the trade winds. But the trade winds still are blasting you with hot wind and spray and rocking the boat 31,000 times a day. I said, I need to get out of the trade winds too. So I looked at the equator in the Atlantic, and I said, look at the Atlantic. The currents and winds of the North Atlantic go clockwise, and the currents and winds in the South Atlantic go counterclockwise. And I said, well, they're like 2 wheels or 2 gears that are together. The current on the equator in the Atlantic is always going west at a couple of knots. That means if you're on the equator in the Atlantic and you sit there for one day, you're traveling almost 50 miles. It's pushing you that way. So it's sometimes difficult to sail from the North Atlantic to the South Atlantic on a boat that doesn't go good against the weather. And that's how Amerigo Vespucci tried to sail into the South Atlantic and was pushed by the current and the winds all the way over to the coast of Brazil. That was how Brazil was discovered. He didn't want to go to Brazil. He wanted to go down to Cape Horn and try to go around the bottom of Africa, but he was pushed to Brazil by the wind and current. So I said, I have to watch out for this. But on the very eastern edge of the Atlantic, I said, there's got to be a place where the winds from the trade winds of the North Atlantic and South Atlantic meet. And where they meet, they have to be light and shift back and forth, and there has to be countercurrents. So I said, I'm going to sail up in that area and get out of the strong wind and the countercurrents, and I need to go there because that's where I'm going to catch rainwater. So I sailed up there, and eventually I caught my rainwater, and I kind of maneuvered the boat, and I said, wow, I like it here. The wind isn't so strong. There's phosphorescence every night. There's fish all around my boat every day. It's beautiful. I like it here. And after a few weeks of doing that, I said, okay, now I'm going to raise my sail and I'm going to sail back to where I started. And then I'm going to put my sail down and heave to and drift again. So I did that. But my object became, how could I tune into the sea even more and dissolve in the sea? So I stopped putting my dots on the chart because I didn't want to think about that. I stopped thinking about what was northeast, south, and west, and I dissolved into the sea, and I became one with the sea. And when I got to the spot where I raised sail before, I just waited. And the next thing I knew, a countercurrent was taking me back, and a wind was blowing me back. So I ended up staying in this big place in the ocean, north of the equator, 300 miles off the African coast, below the Cabo Verde Islands, and I stayed there for months because the winds and currents blew me every which direction. But if I had gone west a little bit and gotten that 2-knot current, it would have taken me 50 miles a day, and I would have been suddenly against the Brazilian coast. If I would go north, there would be the hurricane season, and then there would be the winter in the North Atlantic. How was I ever going to get back? But I found myself in that beautiful place, and that was where I had the most wonderful time in the trip, catching my rainwater, catching my fish, eating my sprouts. I stopped having to work so hard. I started making a lot of paintings and writing very beautiful pieces about how man, by tuning into nature with love, could heal himself, and that was how I had the strength there, and I became a poetic artist who was living at sea for a year, longer than any human had ever been at sea, and longer than any human had ever left the touch of the earth. And I felt that I was getting these visions and these poetic inspirations, and I didn't want it to end. But pretty soon I realized, well, hey, I've been at sea over 3 years, and Sonia's waiting for me on the shore with my son, who's almost 2 years old. It's time for me to come back. So I told everyone, I said, okay, I'm going to be back. I said, send me the tide charts for New York. Oh, okay, at 1 o'clock, the tide's going to be high. I'm going to hit the dock in Manhattan at 1 o'clock on June the 17th. And then for the next months, I slowly sailed back to New York and timed my arrival, and I had storms and more torn sails and all kinds of things happened, but managed to time it so that I was able to sail in, and I sailed in and hit the dock at 1 o'clock. at 1 o'clock, and there was Sonia with my 2-year-old son and all of my family, all of my relatives, hundreds of people looking at me, and I looked up and I saw all of those eyes looking at me at one time, and I could see who they were. And I said, the first thing I said, I had not seen a human for over 2 years or talked to anyone for over 2 years, and the first thing I said was, I see a lot of people who I love. And then I got up on the dock and greeted everyone, and that was my return to the world and the end of the longest sea voyage in history.
I do remember that moment. That was awesome.
Were you there?
Yeah, I was on a press boat.
Oh.
Yeah.
When the time comes to die, as it all must for all, to awaken sailors' heaven where nothing else ever rusts, and always there would be fair winds of following sea. Welcome home, Reid. Now, ladies and gentlemen, just back from a limited engagement of well over 1,200 days, ladies and gentlemen, Reid Stowe.
Almost lost my voice. I've been going hooray all the way up the river for the last 5 hours, and I haven't even talked to anyone for 2 years. So
I think you did something really extraordinary, and I'm really sorry that people treated you so unfair.
A lot of them were like know-it-alls and were saying I was doing everything wrong, but they had never been to sea. They had only read stories. A couple of them were little sailors, but they really ganged up. There was a whole bunch of them, and they all had a thrill bashing me, or every time I had a trouble saying he's not going to make it, or every time I said something saying he's lying. And they really worked hard to go to the press and tell them all these things, how everything was a lie and all the bad things about me. But I think that was also in 2007 through 2010. So that was somewhat the beginning of the internet and the whole phenomena of people with false identities saying bad things about people and getting a thrill from that, because they weren't a real person. They could say anything they wanted. So this whole phenomena started on the internet around then, and I think they were just part of it. And I think that those type of people have come out a lot in the last years, and everyone knows that people who say bad things about people it's happening everywhere to everyone on the internet. And I think it's a phenomena of our times, and it's a lot with people who have frustrations in their lives, venting it on people who are doing things that maybe they would like to do. So I can imagine that I would like to think that any sailor or any man would love nothing more than to have the ability to take his boat on the sea and go where he wants to go with a beautiful woman who loves him. So they hated me for that, and everything, and then they hated me for talking about love and all kinds of things. So I think it's has to do with the frustration of our society and how some people only have the ability to vent like that, and then they get a thrill from it, and they all joke together and say, "Wasn't that clever what I said?" And they were real smart, and they were very technically skilled, and the things they said sounded like the truth. They were so good at saying them, but they were completely fabricated and twisted and all that kind of stuff. So that whole phenomena. Then once I dropped her off, then that gave them even more reason. And even like National Geographic said on the phone to me and my literary agent, "We can't do your story because we'll have a public backlash." So then the media was afraid to do my story because they were worried about having a public backlash. How can a man go on an expedition and drop his girlfriend off halfway around the world and leave her like that?
How did you deal with that? But most of the people admire you, right? Most of the people are in awe.
I got lots of admiration, Yeah,
Yeah.
and people saying a lot of good things.
Yeah. And
And when they were
acknowledgement.
saying we want to see you dead, I was going to myself. I knew that my mom and all of her friends were praying for me and praying out loud. And I thought, these negative people don't have a chance with me because all these people are praying for me. And that's going to give me the ability to go. But it's not fun to be harassed,
No.
all the time.
Yeah.
But I think that has happened to a lot of people, and people in these positions have to just accept that and keep going. I want to be an inspiration to people, to inspire them to follow their dreams. And I also believe that we all have the same thing inside of us, and that by realizing how much the same we all are, we all come much closer to knowing ourselves better and able to do better things in the world.
Yeah, and that's also the reason why I collect these audios. And when you asked me if I have another question, well, you never had doubts. So, but if you don't experience that kind of doubt, then what was the most precious gift out of this voyage, and what was the biggest challenge?
First of all, I do have doubts and negative thoughts. It's not like I don't, but I never doubted my ability to succeed with the mission. I had other doubts that I had to overcome, and of course, as I described in the earlier, yes, I did worry about why I wasn't able to catch rain for 6 months and what was that going to mean. And I was affected by all the negative attacks that came on me. And I was just disappointed that such people could try to hurt not just me, but anyone who tried to defend me, from old loving people like my mother to my friends, and it hurt me that the press would take quotes from negative people who were using aliases and use those quotes as if they were the truth. So that sort of stuff did hurt me, and I did have an overall feeling of why isn't the press sharing my story in a positive way, and why isn't it getting out better, and why can't I be more effective at sharing a message of love and following your dreams, when I'd already shown everybody that I had sailed further than any man in history and left the touch of the earth longer than any man in history. Why was I still being attacked, and why was I not effective at sharing my message of love? So yes, I did have my doubts, and I did have my disappointments, and in fact I still do. I actually did get a couple of very good stories in German sailing magazines. They wrote good stories about me, and also a few years after I got back, I got a couple of big stories. I got a big story in, I think, Stern magazine. Has reported it well.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, I saw that. German press covered you a lot. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm glad that that you saw that and all. And so throughout difficulties that I have readapting to life, and the way society is now, and the values that people have, and the difficulties that I've had trying to get on my feet, say, because my dream was always to do the longest sea voyage in history. I don't have good financial skills. So, but whatever the troubles that I might be going through, I still have a beautiful life. I have to know that I have a wonderful, loving partner, and that I couldn't be happier with my love relationship, and we have a wonderful child, and we have a wonderful family life. And now, after fulfilling my dream, when my mom died, and my dad, who has Alzheimer's, we knew that we could come here and take care of my dad and make his life nice. And that's what we've done. And I feel a great satisfaction with that, and really feel that that more people should realize the importance of caring for their parents as their parents cared for them. Mm-hmm. So I have good satisfaction with that. And when I have difficulty getting my story out, I know that it took me 20 years to get going, so maybe it's going to take a little while for me to get my story out, and I'll stick with it.
You came back as a different person, I believe, right? I mean, the living on the ocean changes you once you conquered all challenges and you lived this life as a fish. What has permanently changed? Or is there something that has permanently changed?
Well, as I explained, I've been doing this sort of thing all my life. So one of the things that gave me confidence that I could actually succeed at living on the sea for 1,000 days was that I had lived my whole life successfully on the ocean, year after year, going on longer and longer voyages, and every experience was beautiful. Then I felt, well, if I go out there, all I have to keep doing is what I've been doing all my life. So it was what I was doing all my life. So if you'd say, well, how has it changed me? I don't know if I had a great change from doing it, because it's always who I was. And even Sonia said, well, it didn't change me because I was always that way too, but we both did grow in so many ways, and we both had so many great experiences. And I had hoped to have one of the best-selling authors who approached me and wanted to do my story. I had hoped to have a real best-selling author who's a real wordsmith do my story and write it in such a way that the largest amount of public would like to hear it. And finally, I realized I was going to have to write my story myself. And I've been working on it for the last year. And when I go to that story, I just say, wow, was I really like that then? Because I described these extended states of day after day being in a state of prayer and thankfulness and having wonderful magical things happen to me and feeling connected with all of humanity and feeling that I had been given the gift to help heal humanity, and that I actually saw how I was doing it. So when I was out there, I entered into a very ecstatic, powerful state, and you can imagine that I did, because I didn't see another human for over 2 years. I didn't enter into any conversations. I didn't hear any political news. I didn't hear any talk. I was just in a state of connecting to the God and the great spirit of the universe and nature, and constantly in my sleep and when I woke up, and feeling great love. So I entered into a state of living that I'm not able to do now, because I have all of these worldly activities that I have to do and think about. And so I look back at what I did, and I feel like, wow, that was a wonderful time that I'm so grateful for and that I want to share, but I won't be able to recreate it again in my life, because I can't attempt such a thing again, to go to such a powerful place in this world, because I can't maintain it a second time. I've gotten older. To do what I did, I had to be a supreme athlete. I got a little worn out. I got a little sore, and I'm not as strong as I was, and so I can't recreate the circumstances that made that wonderful thing possible. And when I look back on it, I just go, wow, that's really great. And now I want to share that with the world. And of course, I still have visions of being able to do great things, and it would be certainly great if people recognized what I did and I was given a platform to share the things that I learned and how they're good for each person and how they're good for the environment and the world. And that platform hasn't really arisen, but for the moment, here with you, in a way, this is me sharing my story as I've wished to do. So the story will keep getting out there and keep going out there, and I still believe in the potential of who knows what will happen in the future. So I still live with big expectations that great things are happening and that greater things will happen.
Yeah.
And I think everyone might have moments in their life when they were able to activate and do what they wanted to do, better at some times than other times. But this is more subtle now, because now I'm here taking care of my old dad who couldn't live without me, and I feel that that's a great thing too. But it's more subtle. It's different, but it still connects to humanity in a big way, and it still has a big feeling and a big message. And certainly, I think that the world could be a better place if more family love was realized. That would help everyone go out into the world in a much better way.
You had a life dream, a life vision, and you did it, and it's accomplished. How does it feel to have, to have had a vision and accomplished it?
Well, like I said, when I think of some of the difficulties that I face now, or some of the disappointments and so forth, I always remember that, whoa, wait a minute, I accomplished my life's dream. I accomplished this amazing thing, and that gives me great satisfaction, and it gives me the strength to believe that I can go on and still accomplish more dreams that I hope are for the betterment of mankind.
Reid, thank you so much.
We appreciate it. Okay, great talking with you. We'll be in close touch.
Yeah, bye. Bye, Sonia.
Okay.
I just saw her walking by.
Okay, you just saw her.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Yeah.